I stood in the shadows of the grand ballroom, watching my sister, Samantha, twirl in her $10,000 wedding dress, while my bank balance quietly shriveled. The crystal chandeliers caught every glint of her tiara, and her laughter echoed across the marble floors, the same laugh she had used 3 months ago when she begged me to co-sign her loan. My name is Claire, and I'm the responsible one, the boring, reliable sister, the one who always steps in when there's a crisis. Tonight, however, I was also the one holding a ticking time bomb in the form of a loan agreement, its repercussions waiting to explode. Claire, darling, why aren't you dancing? My mother's voice floated toward me, sharp and disapproving as always. She gestured to the crowded dance floor, where Samantha and her new husband, Nathan, were lost in their own little world. Someone has to make sure the vendors are paid, I replied, tapping away at my tablet. Unless you'd like to handle the final payments? I shot her a knowing look. After all, you're so good with numbers. My mother wrinkled her nose, adjusting her designer shawl as if the suggestion offended her very essence. That's what you're good at, dear, she said with a thin smile. Samantha had always been the creative one, the free spirit. I held back the response I had been biting back for years. Instead, I gave her a tight smile, pulling up the loan document once more, checking for the 100th time that the clause was still there, buried deep in the fine print, waiting to be triggered. Remember when she first showed us the venue? My mother continued, completely misreading my silence for sentimentality. She was so sure it had to be here. Worth every penny. I nodded absently. Every penny, I muttered under my breath. $50,000 to be exact. I recalled that day vividly, but not with the nostalgia my mother seemed to feel. Please, Claire, Samantha had sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes desperate. The bank won't approve us without a co-signer. You're the only one with good enough credit. That's because I actually pay my bills, I had snapped. Family helps each other, my father had chimed in from his armchair, not looking up from his newspaper. Your sister would do the same for you. I had almost laughed at that. Samantha had never done anything for anyone except herself. I'll pay every payment, Samantha had promised, clutching my hands tightly. I swear. Nathan's startup is about to take off and will be loaded. I just need your help now. I had nodded, biting my lip, knowing the truth of the situation, but too tired to argue. Now I watched Nathan whisper something to Samantha, making her giggle. He caught my eye across the room and raised his champagne glass with a wink. I raised mine back, wondering if he had any idea what the loan agreement contained. Wondering if either of them had actually read the paperwork before signing it. Mrs. Foster, a wedding planner, suddenly materialized beside me, breaking my thoughts. The photographer wants to know if we're still doing the sunset photos on the terrace? Of course we are, Samantha's voice appeared, pulling Nathan along by the hand. Claire, you have to be in these photos. You made all this happen. If only she knew how true that was, I thought bitterly, letting myself be dragged outside. The setting sun bathed everything in gold, including Samantha's perfect face as she posed against the balustrade. Our parents joined us and the photographer arranged us like dolls. The perfect family, the perfect wedding, the American dream. Closer together, the photographer called. Big smiles, this is a celebration. I smiled, thinking about the email I'd received that morning from my friend Allison, who worked in legal. It's bulletproof, she had written. The clause is active the moment they miss a payment. If they leave the country without a payment plan, liability reverts to the original sponsors, your parents. I had taken a deep breath, remembering every signature, every tear-filled manipulation, every guilt trip that had led to this point. Another one, the photographer called. Everyone say happily ever after. Samantha threw her arms around me, champagne on her breath. I love you so much, Claire. You're the best. The absolute best. Over her shoulder, I watched Nathan check his phone, his face briefly serious before he slipped it back into his pocket. 3 weeks ago, I had seen him book 2 one-way tickets to a country with no extradition treaty. He didn't know I knew. Back in my hotel room that night, I opened my laptop for one final check. The loan agreement glowed on the screen, the signatures clear at the bottom. Samantha's loopy scrawl, Nathan's confident slash, my parents' hasty scribbles, and my own careful print. Below them all, the clause waited like a coiled snake. I touched the screen gently. Let's see who pays now, I thought to myself as I closed the laptop and poured myself a drink. It had been 3 months since the wedding and I was sitting in my favorite cafe, staring at my phone's call log. 32 missed calls from Samantha, 16 from Nathan, and 48 unanswered texts. The first loan payment was overdue by 3 weeks. I could feel the weight of it all in the pit of my stomach. "You're obsessing again," Allison said, sliding into the seat across from me with 2 fresh lattes. "How many times have you checked Instagram today?" I picked up my phone, opened the app, and turned it toward her. Samantha's latest post showed her and Nathan on a tropical beach, cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Living our best life, debt-free and ready for the future." Allison raised an eyebrow. "Wow, she's living the dream on your dime, huh?" I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my text messages. "Look what Mom sent me this morning." I showed Allison the message my mother had sent. "The bank called again. Please handle this, Claire. You know how Dad gets when he's stressed." Allison clicked her tongue. "Have you told them about the clause yet?" "Not yet. I'm waiting for the right moment," I replied, taking a slow sip of my latte. The truth was, I wanted them to stew a little longer. Let the pressure build. Allison sighed. "You know you can't keep avoiding it. You'll be free, but only if you take that final step. Morally, you're in the clear." I hesitated, knowing what she was right, but the thought of confronting my family still left a bitter taste in my mouth. They'd always made me feel like their bank account, always calling me in to fix things while they spent their money on luxuries. The phone buzzed. It was from Samantha. "Hey, Claire. Sorry I've been so hard to reach. The Wi-Fi here is just awful. Listen, about those payment notices you keep forwarding. I know you'll figure it out. You always do. You're so good with money stuff. Anyway, love you. Don't work too hard." I stared at the message, feeling the blood rise in my face. I clicked the volume button to turn on speakerphone and then clicked the voicemail from Samantha. Her voice, sweet and full of fake concern, filled the room. "Oh, and could you maybe stop calling so much? It's kind of desperate, and Nathan says it's bringing down our vibe. Thanks. Kisses." Allison's eyes widened as the message ended. The audacity. "You're still planning to go through with it, right?" I chuckled darkly. "Of course I am. I'm waiting for them to make it right. It's time they face consequences, but for now I'm letting them sweat it out." Allison leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You're sure you want to do this? Legally you're covered. Morally, I don't know. It's harsh." "I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just making sure that everyone gets wet." I stared at the phone for a moment before closing it. "And when the tide comes in, they'll realize they're drowning." A text came through from my mother. "Please call me, Claire. The bank is being very insistent." I took a deep breath, wiped the sudden sweat from my palms, and opened my email. It was time to prepare the documents, gather the evidence. There was no going back now. The next few days dragged by in a blur of legal documents, phone calls, and the occasional text message from my mother asking if I was handling things. What she really meant was, "Can you save us again?" I hadn't responded to any of them. Instead, I kept my head down, waiting for the right moment to unleash the consequences they all thought would never come. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the loan agreement on my laptop. The clause was highlighted, the text glaring at me like a time bomb, waiting for its moment to explode. Allison's words echoed in my mind. "It's not about them drowning, it's about making sure they feel what it's like to be responsible for once." It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about my freedom. A few days passed and I saw a new post from Samantha. This time it wasn't just a picture of her in a bikini on some exotic beach. It was a picture of her and Nathan toasting with champagne glasses, with the caption, "Living the dream, debt-free. So grateful for the support we've received." Support? The nerve. I glanced at my phone and it buzzed with an incoming call from my mother. "Hello, Mother," I answered, my voice cold. "Claire, we need to talk about the loan. Please, my mother's voice wavered, the stress already evident. You'll need to talk to the bank, mother, I replied, a chill in my tone. And you might want to mention the clause. You know, the one that makes you responsible when they don't pay. Silence stretched across the line. Then, finally, my mother's voice came through, shaking. You didn't. You didn't actually enforce it, did you? I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my email again, making sure the documentation was intact. The clauses activated, I had to remind myself that once the button was pushed, there was no turning back. Claire, my mother said again, her voice breaking. We're family and you're doing this to us? You did this to me first, I snapped, cutting her off. Remember how you guilt me into paying for Dad's surgery while Samantha was on vacation in Europe? This is the price you pay for taking advantage of me. I hung up the phone before she could say another word, leaning back in my chair. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few months pressed down on me. I had done it. The contract was in motion. The next few weeks felt like the longest of my life. I went through the motions, work, coffee dates with Allison, responding to emails, but my mind was consumed with what was happening behind the scenes. Samantha continued to post pictures on Instagram, living a life I paid for, making it seem like everything was perfect. Meanwhile, I checked the loan payment log every day and still nothing. The payment hadn't come. The clause was officially in play. Each day, I checked my phone for messages from the bank or any sign of the first official consequence. I couldn't explain the knot in my stomach. Part of me felt satisfied, like a chess player waiting for checkmate, but another part of me felt anxious, unsure of how far this would go. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. It was an afternoon and I had just left a meeting when I saw the email notification. Loan default activated was the subject line. My heart skipped. I opened the email quickly, scanning the contents. The bank had received the paperwork I had sent, and the clause was now active. All liability had been transferred to Samantha and Nathan's co-signers, my parents. It was official. They would have to pay. I read the fine print again. Liability is hereby transferred to the co-signers in the event of default. If payment is not received in full within the next 10 days, further legal action will be taken. I closed the laptop, letting out a long breath. This wasn't over, but it was a step closer to justice. The following morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Please, Claire, call us. The bank is breathing down our necks. We don't know what to do. I stared at the message, trying to hold back the satisfaction bubbling up inside me. I wanted to ignore it, let them suffer a little longer, but part of me, part of the old me, wanted to pick up the phone and fix it, just like I always did. But no. Not this time. I waited another hour, letting the message sit unanswered. My phone rang and I immediately knew it was her. I sighed, answering it. What do you want, Mom? Claire, we can't pay it. We don't have the money. Your father's savings are gone and the house is on the line. My mother's voice was tight with panic. Please, Claire. Help us. I could hear my father's voice in the background, weak, pleading. It was like every emotion I had repressed for years was flooding back. But there was no turning back. They had pushed me too far. Help you? I said, my voice colder than I intended. Help you after everything you've put me through? After everything you've taken from me? No, Mom. You're on your own now. Her silence was deafening and I could almost feel the weight of it. Finally, I spoke again. I gave you everything. Every cent, every ounce of my savings. And what did I get in return? You made me feel like an ATM, like I was nothing but a solution to your problems. Well, now it's time for you to fix it. The line went quiet and I almost regretted my words. But then I remembered the years of manipulation. I remembered my college fund, my father's surgery, the thousands I had given them, and how none of it had ever been enough. You're right, my mother whispered, but we're family, Claire. You should be there for us. No, you don't get it, I snapped, standing up from my chair. Being family doesn't mean endlessly sacrificing yourself. You've drained me dry. I'm done fixing your messes. I hung up before she could respond, feeling a strange sense of peace. I had done what needed to be done. The following days were a blur of emotions and phone calls. My inbox was flooded with updates from the bank, from lawyers, and even from my friends. Everyone was in crisis mode. Everyone except me. And then came the unexpected text. It was from Nathan. I hadn't heard from him in days, and the message was cryptic. "This has gone too far. You're breaking Samantha, Claire. You need to stop this. She's losing everything." I scoffed. Losing everything? They were the ones who'd stolen from me. They were the ones who thought they could manipulate me into paying for their lives. Now it was my turn to make sure they learned the consequences of their actions. I didn't reply to Nathan. Instead, I opened up my legal folder and started reviewing the documents again. Everything was going according to plan. My parents had a week to figure it out, and then they would have to deal with the consequences. But the messages kept coming. The next one was from my mother. "We can't afford the house anymore, Claire. Please, just let us pay this back in installments. We'll work it out, we promise." I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. "You'll figure it out. It's time you face the music. I've done enough." And just like that, I closed my phone and turned my attention to something else. It was a strange feeling, letting go of the guilt that had been weighing me down for so long. A few days later, the tension in the air became palpable. The messages and phone calls continued, but I was no longer bothered. I had made my peace with the situation. The bank had confirmed that they were in the process of transferring the debt to my parents, and I knew that once it was out in the open, there would be no more hiding from the truth. The day I received the final notification from the bank was the day everything changed. My parents' property was officially in jeopardy. The collection agency had begun the process of garnishing their assets. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. They had ignored my years of sacrifices. Now they had to pay the price. It was late in the afternoon when I received a call from my father. His voice was strained, and I could tell he had been crying. "Claire, please, we need you to stop this. We don't know what to do. They're threatening to take everything," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. I could hear my mother sobbing in the background. It had always been the same. They would cry, beg, and plead, but nothing ever changed. They had never been there for me, not the way a family should be. They had always depended on me, taking everything without ever thinking about the consequences. "I told you before, Dad," I replied calmly, trying to keep my emotions in check. "This is the price for everything you've put me through. I gave you everything I had, and now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." "You don't understand," my father said, his voice low. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." I sighed, shaking my head. "It's too late for apologies, Dad. I've already made my decision. I'm not bailing you out again." With that, I ended the call. I wasn't sure what else to say. What was left to say? They had done this to themselves. The days that followed were filled with legal documents, phone calls from the bank, and emails from lawyers. It was clear that my parents were struggling to hold it together, but I felt no sympathy. They had made their choices, and now they had to deal with the fallout. Samantha and Nathan were still unreachable, and I could only assume they were trying to figure out how to avoid paying their debts. It had become clear that they had no intention of fulfilling their obligations. Their lives, once built on my sacrifices, were crumbling around them. I couldn't say I felt sorry for them. A week later, I received a call from Allison, my trusted friend and confidant. Her voice was tight, and I could hear the concern in her tone. "Claire, have you seen the news?" she asked. "There's been a leak about the loan." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean? What's going on?" She hesitated before responding. "The loan documents. They're online. It's going viral. People are calling it a scandal." I immediately grabbed my phone, scanning the headlines. My stomach twisted as I read the article that had gone viral. The story detailed the loan default and the clause that had been activated. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind of it. Samantha and Nathan's names were everywhere. "Claire, you need to get ahead of this," Allison said, her voice urgent. "If this goes public, it could get ugly." I took a deep breath, trying to process what was happening. The scandal had spread faster than I had anticipated, but there was no turning back now. This was the fallout. The entire world was about to see what my family had done to me. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to the bank's fraud department. I had gathered evidence over the months, texts, emails, and other documents that proved my family's intention to default on the loan. It was time to make sure that the truth came to light. I hit send on the email, feeling the weight of the moment. There was no going back now. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The media frenzy only grew, and I watched from the sidelines as my family's life unraveled. My parents were being investigated for their role in the loan default, and Samantha and Nathan were now facing criminal charges. It wasn't long before the collection agency had filed fraud charges. Everything they had built, everything they had stolen from me, was falling apart. I sat in my office, watching the news on my computer. A news anchor was talking about the charges against Samantha and Nathan, and my name was mentioned as part of the investigation. It felt strange seeing my name on the screen in such a public way. I had never wanted this, but it was too late to stop it now. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Please, Claire, come home. We need to talk. We can fix this." I stared at the message, wondering what she expected from me. After everything, she was still asking for my help. I couldn't do it. Not anymore. I deleted the message without responding. They were on their own now. Chapter 10: The Final Step. A month later, my parents' assets had been seized, and the house they had once taken for granted was now in foreclosure. The vacation property was sold, and the money was used to pay off part of the debt. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the evening light, and I could finally breathe. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had lost my family, but I had gained something more important: control over my own life. The money, the sacrifices, the manipulation, it had all been a part of a larger plan that I had never asked for. But now I was finally free of it. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was an email from the fraud department. They had completed their investigation and the case had been closed. The charges against my family were official, and there would be no coming back from it. I smiled to myself as I typed a quick response to the email. "Thank you for your cooperation. I'm glad to see justice served." As I hit send, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. It had been a few months since the fallout. My parents were still struggling to rebuild their lives, but I had moved on. The news had faded from the headlines, but the scars they left on me would never completely heal. My life was no longer dictated by their expectations, their demands, or their manipulations. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city below. The view was nothing like the house I had once imagined inheriting, but it was mine, completely mine. No strings attached. No guilt trips. I had made my peace with the decisions I'd made. The silence from my parents and Samantha felt like a heavy weight on my chest, but it was a weight I had chosen to carry. I had let go of the constant fear of disappointing them, of constantly picking up the pieces of their messes. For the first time, I felt like I was living for myself. I had never intended to lose my family. I had never set out to destroy their lives, but the truth was, their actions had pushed me to the breaking point. They had taken, and I had given until there was nothing left of me. I had been their scapegoat, their fixer, the one who could always save them. But in the end, I was the one who needed saving. The last time I had spoken to my father, he had apologized. For the first time, he had admitted that he had failed me. But it was too little, too late. They had crossed a line and I had crossed my own. I couldn't go back. Not after everything that had happened. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Allison, my only true friend through all of this. "Let's grab drinks tonight. I need to celebrate something new." She replied almost instantly. "I'll be there. I think we both deserve a drink, don't you?" I smiled to myself. I had walked away from a life of being used. I had walked away from the toxic family dynamics that had defined me for too long. And now I was stepping into a new life. One where I wasn't just a supporting character in someone else's story. I was the main character. The next day, I met with Allison at our usual spot, a quiet bar tucked away in a corner of the city. We ordered our drinks and talked about everything, life, work, and the latest gossip. But there was one thing on my mind. One thing that had been gnawing at me for weeks. "Allison," I began, staring into my glass, "do you think I did the right thing?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, Claire. You did what was best for you. And that's all you can do." "But it cost me my family," I said, my voice quiet. "I don't think it did. You still have your life. Your peace. They're the ones who lost. You didn't make them fail. They did that all on their own. You just held up the mirror." I nodded slowly. She was right. I hadn't torn my family apart. I had simply stopped holding it together. They had broken themselves, and I had stopped being the glue that kept everything from falling apart. The weight on my chest lightened just a little more, and I realized that this wasn't about their failure. It was about my survival. "Do you think I'll ever forgive them?" I asked, looking up at Allison. She paused for a moment, then shook her head. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You can't forget what they've done to you. But forgiveness means you stop letting them control you. You stop letting them take from you. And that's something you're already doing." I smiled, finally feeling like I understood what she meant. Forgiveness wasn't about reconciliation. It was about letting go of the past and giving myself the freedom I deserved. The months that followed were filled with new experiences. I found joy in things I had never given myself the chance to enjoy before. I traveled. I made new friends. I started a new chapter in my career, one that was all mine. I had never realized how much my family had weighed on me. How much their expectations had shaped my every move. The constant guilt trips. The silent judgment. But now it was gone. And for the first time I was breathing deeply, without the suffocating weight of their demands on my shoulders. I didn't look back. There were no more phone calls from my mother. No more desperate texts from Samantha. No more manipulative pleas for help. They had been cut off, and the world felt lighter because of it. In a way, I was grieving. Grieving the family I thought I could have had. But I had also learned that family wasn't always blood. Family wasn't about being obligated to fix everyone else's problems. It was about finding people who would support you, who would lift you up instead of pulling you down. I didn't need them anymore. I was finally free. It was a Friday night, and I sat in my apartment, looking out at the city skyline. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You've done enough, Claire. It's time to let go. We're sorry for everything we did to you." It was from my father. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I stared at the message, taking a deep breath. For the first time, I realized I had already let go. I didn't need their apologies. I had already moved on. I blocked the number and leaned back in my chair. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel bitter. I felt nothing. I had let go not for them but for me. And that was the final piece of freedom. The weeks that followed were quiet. Peaceful. A stark contrast to the chaos I'd lived through for so long. I had finally learned to embrace the freedom that came with taking control of my own life. The phone calls from my parents ceased, and for the first time in years I was not waiting for a call that would take away a piece of me. I wasn't constantly on edge, wondering when the next crisis would erupt. It was surreal, almost like waking up from a long, exhausting dream. I continued to build my life piece by piece. I focused on my career, on the things I loved, on the people who mattered, Allison being my constant anchor. She had been my rock throughout this whole ordeal, the one who never judged, but always pushed me to be better, to do better. I couldn't have asked for a better friend. But even though the peace was settling in, there was one thing that I couldn't quite shake, the lingering guilt. I wasn't ashamed of my actions. No, I had made the right choice. But sometimes, late at night, when everything was still, I would catch myself wondering if I had made the right choice for me. Did I need to cut them off? Couldn't I have given them another chance? It didn't take long for those thoughts to fade. Every time they crept in, I reminded myself of the past, of how my family had used me, of how I had sacrificed so much only to be drained dry. The reality was simple: they had crossed a line that I couldn't cross back over. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I was enough on my own. One Saturday morning, I received an unexpected email from an old acquaintance. It was an invitation to an event, a charity gala in the city. The email was from the legal firm I had worked with during the whole loan fiasco. At first, I was hesitant to open it. I didn't know if I could handle seeing any of the people from that world again, even if they were on the other side of the courtroom. But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked open the message. Dear Claire, we are honored to invite you to our annual charity gala this weekend. It would be a pleasure to have you attend as a guest of our firm. Your support during our recent case was invaluable, and we would love to celebrate your contributions with you. I stared at the screen, unsure of how to feel. They wanted to celebrate me. It felt odd. I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I had just stood up for myself. But there was something intriguing about the idea of being in a room full of people who saw me as strong, as someone who had made it through something difficult. Maybe this was a chance to truly move on, to step into a new version of myself. I thought about it for a moment before making my decision. I'd be honored to attend, I typed, feeling a slight flutter in my chest. I'll see you there. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress. I hadn't been to an event like this in years. The last time I had dressed up for something was probably during one of my parents' countless family dinners, where I was always expected to smile through the pain. Tonight, though, the smile I wore was real. It was a smile for me, not for anyone else. I took a deep breath and grabbed my purse, heading out the door. The city lights were vibrant, and I felt a rush of energy as I stepped into the night. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't hiding behind a mask of obligation. I was free, and the world felt wide open. When I arrived at the gala, the atmosphere was electric. The firm's lawyers greeted me with warm smiles and polite conversation, and I realized how far I had come. I wasn't just the fixer anymore. I wasn't the person everyone leaned on when things went wrong. I was here because I had earned it. Throughout the night, I mingled, laughing and talking with people who respected me, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. It felt liberating. I had never realized how much I had been defined by my family's expectations until I saw myself through the eyes of people who didn't have a stake in my life. I was finally just me. By the end of the night, I felt light, almost giddy. I had just danced with a stranger, a man whose name I didn't even know, without any weight on my shoulders, without any guilt. No one was asking me for anything. I wasn't fixing anyone's problems. It was just me living in the moment. As the evening came to a close, I found myself standing by the balcony, gazing out over the city. The lights below seemed to pulse with the same energy I felt inside. It was a strange feeling, this freedom, this peace. I had learned how to stand on my own, to set boundaries, and most importantly, to stop letting others define my worth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was an email from the fraud investigators. We are pleased to inform you that the investigation into the loan default has concluded. Your cooperation was invaluable, and we have taken all necessary legal steps to ensure that the charges will stick. Thank you for your patience and assistance. I read the email twice, letting the words sink in. Everything had come full circle. My actions had consequences. But for the first time, they were consequences that worked in my favor. I smiled to myself. I had one, not because I had ruined my family, but because I had finally chosen myself. I had learned to prioritize my own well-being over the needs of people who had never done the same for me. And as I stood there, alone but not lonely, I knew that this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, I found myself at a crossroads. I had spent so much of my life taking care of others, making sure everyone else was okay, that I had never truly stopped to ask myself what I wanted. Now, with my parents' debt paid off and their lives in disarray, I was free to move forward. One night, as I sat on my couch, scrolling through my phone, I came across an old photo of me and my sister, taken when we were kids. It was a simpler time, before the weight of expectations had suffocated me. For a moment, I felt a pang in my chest, an old wound reopening. But then I remembered how far I'd come. I wasn't that girl anymore. And I didn't need to be. I deleted the photo, letting go of the past completely. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly living. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I wasn't burdened by the past anymore. I had learned that the key to moving forward wasn't about fixing others. It was about fixing myself. I took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to save me. I was my own savior. And that was enough.